Hello, I'm going to treat Act 1, Scene 4 as a whole, but it is, of course, impossible that it will all come up at once, if any of it does at all. So you might find that I cover the first part and then park it before moving on to the bit where the ghost enters, which is a much more likely thing to come up. Let's just have a look at the opening, though, because there's one quite odd thing about it. Um, we have a lot of atmosphere setting. Bear in mind, in The Globe in 1601, the audience would have relied on a kind of verbal scene painting in order to imagine the outside. Um, all the other scenes we imagine having happened indoors, and this one is an outdoor scene. It's also night, so you can imagine them perhaps not carrying candles, so that they would. You can imagine if they were carrying candles, they'd be seen by other guards, um, um, and also that sense of the world being dark to them wouldn't be conveyed. So they have to do a lot of the description um, of the climate of the environment by words. So we have them and doing it in pentameter. Yeah, but shrewdly, it is very cold, very straightforward. It is nipping and an eager air. Now there is talk of midnight, of the witching hour, and Horatio anticipating the time when the ghost will walk. Um, we have that kind of foreshadowing, that tension. It then draws near the season wherein the spirit held his wont to walk. Now, let's just talk a little bit about this flourish of trumpets. And you'll see that the bit we have on the screen now is the bit about the bit in response to that. The trumpets, remember, are sounding because the king is expressing his great joy for Hamlet remaining and not going to Wittenberg, which was most retrograde to his desire. The guns go off and everyone gets rat-assed. Now, this is a ritual that they call upon Hamlet to explain. And Hamlet does. Hamlet does in a characteristically very long, musing, philosophical way. And I'm just going to summarize really. What Hamlet says is, yes, the king is keeping wassail, he is drinking, and people think that this is what we do in Denmark. However, Hamlet goes on, people are often besmirched by one part of their reputation, and Danes can do all kinds of reasonable things, and they'd still be associated with this one. There is just a hint of what Antony puts so much more quickly in Julius Caesar. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred in their bones. And so we have that that sense here about reputation, that someone's virtues else, be they as pure as grace, as infinite as man may undergo, shall, in a general sense, take corruption from that particular fault. The idea that somebody could be heroic, but undermined by one particular thing. So you could apply this to the play as a whole, the theme of appearance versus reality, the themes perhaps of reputation in general. You could indeed talk about the elevated reputation of old Hamlet, who is after all about to arrive, and to think about that. But strangely, and one last thing I'll mention about this is that Laurence Olivier latches onto that and uses it as a kind of epigraph, a kind of motto for his whole film. And that is a way, for Laurence Olivier, he begins his film by saying this is a film about a young man who could not make up his mind. I think the idea there being that Hamlet is a prince among men who would have struck most royally, but is undermined perhaps by his melancholy, perhaps by his indecision, or whatever it is that makes us look at him as the kind of failure who could not exact the vengeance he needed to exact upon Claudius for the death of his father. I'm going to park that part there, and I'm going to now look at the bit with the ghost. Now, enter the ghost, and what I'm particularly going to look at is Hamlet's response to the ghost. The ghost is silent. It becomes clear that the ghost will only speak to Hamlet. And we've mentioned this before, the only dialogue we get from the ghost goes directly to Hamlet, apart from the moment when he says swear underneath the floorboards, underneath the stage. The ghost arrives. Now look at how Hamlet talks to it. He addresses the ghost directly. He addresses the ghost intimately, thou and thy being a more intimate, direct, personal form than you and your. First of all, though, he apostrophizes. He talks to people who may or may not be there. But when he's saying, angels and ministers of grace defend us, he could be apostrophizing, but we could be allowed to think that angels and ministers really are there. In which case, you can look at that as a way of anticipating that otherworldly nature that Hamlet sees around him. It's almost like he's more tuned into the world beyond than anybody else. And then look, he directly addresses intimately as a son to a father, the ghost. Look at the anaphora here. Be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned, bring with the airs, that's a conditional, whether or not you bring airs from heaven or blasts from hell. Be thy intents, and there's the anaphora again, picking up on be thy intents, wicked or charitable. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. Now, lots going on there. I want you to as well to notice that there's an emphasis here on the first syllable of the line, which is called not an iamb but a trochee. These are trochees. They start the line with such a lurch that I believe they convey a sense of Hamlet's shock. And you're going to hear those stresses again and again on the front syllables of the line. King, father, royal Dane, oh answer me. And you wouldn't go, let me not burst in ignorance. Go, let me not burst in ignorance. So there's another trochee there, another trochee there. And that's a trochee there. Okay. So you'll hear that sense of panic that upends the normal rhythm of a line. Now, bear in mind, this is all conditional. You know, whether or not you're this, whether or not you're that, we get that sense. Whatever happens, I will speak to thee. Will being what we call the intentive use of the verb to be. I intend to, like in the German, ich willen, I want to speak to thee. I fully plan to. Now, as to the content of what he's saying, be thy intents wicked or charitable. He is cautious. He fully intends to speak to the ghost, but he's open-minded about what kind of ghost this is. This chimes with what he says later on. The devil can assume a pleasing shape. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. It's almost as though Hamlet's curiosity, his desire for a greater understanding of the world, even if it's the world beyond ours. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Even if it's the world beyond that, he has to get to the bottom of it. Look now at this line. I'll call thee Hamlet, king, father, royal Dane. Now, you need to notice here the caesuras. I imagine with those caesuras, he's pausing. It's as though Hamlet is invoking his father by his different attributes, which makes him quite individual. You know, he's splitting the king up, his father up into, well, you are the king, therefore the ruler of Denmark. Okay, that didn't work. You're my father. Can I appeal to you personally and intimately? Pause. Caesura. No, that didn't work. Okay, what do we call one another in normal conversation, or how would we address you formally as a member of the Danish royal family? Royal Dane. It doesn't work. And look, again, Hamlet's use of the word oh. It's not verbal. It's not even articulate. It's again that sense of panic. And then he lurches towards that imperative. Oh, answer me. Let me not burst in ignorance. Now, let me is another form of imperative. It's actually called the usive subjunctive, but it has the effect of ordering, of saying, this is how it's going to be. Let me not burst in ignorance. Again, that search for truth, which you can link to those conditionals. He absolutely has to get to the So whatever happens, he must understand. I'm just saying that so you can link those two ideas. And then this string of long, long questions. But tell, why thy canonized bones, hearsed in death, have burst their cerements? Remember in Act 1, Scene 1, there's a little flashback, a little note, a little link to Julius Caesar, a very recent and very big hit of Shakespeare's, where the graves stand untenanted. And Horatio picks up on that. And it's the same kind of language here from Hamlet. Thy canonized bones, again that absolute reverence for his father, hearsed in death, have burst their cerements. There's something I've got beyond the seal. It's almost Christ-like resurrection, as if the stone, the boulder, has rolled away. Hence that word sepulchre as well. Why the sepulchre, wherein we saw thee quietly interred, has oped his ponderous and marble jaws to cast thee up again. There is again, I do think, there's a sense of resurrection, of an almost Christian understanding of the world beyond, which you can later on, if this comes up as an A and a B, you can link to that desperate sense of the Elizabethan audience to cling to their fond ideas of purgatory and the fact that the idea that the dead haven't completely left them. What may this mean? And again, a long, long question. Again, that desire to get to the truth. That thou, dead corse, meaning corpse, again in complete steel revisits thus the glimpses of the moon, making night hideous. Now, I'm going to move on from this speech, which I think we've covered, and to look at the physical action that follows. He is so curious, so Odysseus-like in his need to understand that he will physically move with it. Bear in mind, the physical business, Act 1, Scene 4 has to take part on a different part of the stage from Act 1, Scene 5, even though they're a logical extension of it. And in fact, you could take them as all one scene. So if you're the director, it's your job to mark a physical distinction between the place where the ghost has dialogue with Hamlet and the part where the watch notices him. So the ghost has to start now the slow process of moving Hamlet from one part of the stage to the other. Now, in drama, it always works best when there's a kind of obstacle, when a scene is composed of people wanting something and life or other characters denying it to him. We see this physically, where first of all we see it verbally, where the other characters, Marcellus, look with what courteous action it waves you to a more removed ground, but do not go with it. Again, an imperative. No, by no means. A bit of back channeling, a bit of support there from Horatio. It will not speak, then I will, and again that intentive form of the verb. I will follow it. I fully intend to, I want to follow it. Do not, my lord. Now, they actually start holding him back. They attempt to restrain him. There's a stage direction, but you don't really need it. Hamlet says, hold off your hands. And then in resisting them, he actually does one of his weird puns, an almost fool-like pun. And hand me, gentlemen, by heaven, I'll make a ghost of him that lets me. I say, away. So he actually, bear in mind that little characteristic there. Hamlet, not known in history as a man of action, wanting that dramaveal that undermines his whole reputation, however virtuous. Hamlet, not known as a man of action, immediately says, listen, if you do not let me go and follow that ghost, I will draw my sword on you. Never mind what happens. I say away. And then back. Go on. I'll follow thee. That is in spite of all of the requests to stay. We do have in extremis, in this difficult situation, a glimpse of Hamlet as the impetuous. We have a little foreshadowing, I would say, and you'll see in my little note there, a little foreshadowing of Hamlet's recklessness. When Hamlet's really up against it, he will forget any self-interest, any strategy. I do not set my life at a pin's fee. And for my soul, again thinking of the other world and his own part in it, what can it do to that, being a thing immortal as itself? My soul's immortal, the ghost's immortal. What can possibly happen? I could end up like the ghost. I can see that situation right there. Later on, when he's about to fight the duel with the Laertes, as I note here, he has that beautiful speech about there being a providence in the fall of a sparrow, and when he says the readiness is all, let be. So here we have the same Hamlet as a Hamlet who's already anticipating those things that he's going to learn on his strange journey towards self-understanding. Okay, and then the ghost leaves, leaving Horatio and Marcellus. That observes the strange Shakespearean convention that you can't have a character on at the end of one scene who then appears at the beginning of another. So there's just enough time for them to cover the gap. And in that really moment, in that really strange moment, we have one of those bizarrely famous lines, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And an understanding that this king, this apparition, must have come because there's something wrong. He must be so devoted to his regal role that he's come to give a message to his people or to Hamlet. Either way, I think that phrase, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, captures that, and here it is again, that sense of contemptus mundi, which makes you almost wish for some other world, or at least begin to understand how characters can travel between this world and the next.